The web of lies. Nate's search for Damian. The streets of Los Angeles buzzed with life as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city. Nate sat in the driver's seat of a rented car, staring at the address Denise had scribbled down for him and Amy. It wasn't much to go on, just a name, Damian, and a possible location. It was flimsy at best, but for Nate, it represented something he had longed for, a connection, a family, an end to the loneliness that had plagued him for years. Beside him, Amy adjusted her seatbelt and flashed him a reassuring smile. "This is it, Nate. I can feel it. We're going to find him." Nate nodded, but his chest felt heavy with doubt. Audra's words echoed in his mind, "You can't trust her. She's using you." It wasn't the first time Audra had voiced her concerns about Amy, but Nate had dismissed them. Amy had been the one to spark this search, the one who seemed as eager as he was to find Damian. How could that be a lie? But Audra wasn't one to speak without reason. Her warnings had grown more urgent as the search progressed, her suspicions about Amy's motives clear. Nate had brushed them off, but now, parked outside a rundown apartment building in LA, he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that maybe Audra had been right. Denise's involvement had been critical. She had been the one to provide the lead, though she was quick to admit it was unverified. "I don't know for sure if it's him," she had said over the phone. "It could just be someone with the same name. But it's worth checking out, isn't it?" Denise's tone had been cautious, almost reluctant, and Nate wondered if she, too, doubted Amy's sincerity. If this lead turned out to be false, or worse, a deliberate fabrication, what would Denise do? Nate knew she was no stranger to schemes, but this felt different. She had to know how high the stakes were for him. Nate sighed, pulling himself out of his thoughts. If Damian wasn't here, it would be another dead end, but at least he would know. He couldn't let fear, or Audra's warnings, keep him from trying. The plan inside the apartment building, Nate and Amy followed the number scrawled on Denise's note. Each step up the creaking stairs felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of his hopes and fears were pressing down on him. Amy led the way, her energy almost infectious. But Nate couldn't ignore the unease creeping into his chest. When they reached the door, Amy hesitated, then knocked. The silence that followed was deafening. A moment later, it swung open. A man stood there, his face shadowed by the dim lighting. He looked to be in his early 20s, with sharp features and an air of guardedness. Nate's heart raced. Could this really be Damian? "Are you Damian?" Amy asked, her voice soft but steady. The man blinked, his expression unreadable. "Who's asking?" "I'm Nate," he said, stepping forward. "If you are Damian, I think I might be your brother." The man's brows furrowed. "Brother? I don't know what you're talking about." Amy interjected, her tone warm and persuasive. "We're just trying to piece things together. Nate's been searching for family, and your name came up. If this is a misunderstanding, we'll leave you alone." The man hesitated, glancing between them before finally stepping back to let them in. A deal or a trap? Inside the small apartment, Nate tried to make sense of the situation. The man seemed genuine, but there was a guardedness in his demeanor that Nate couldn't ignore. "I don't know anything about having a brother," the man said finally, sitting down on the edge of a worn-out couch. "But if you're telling the truth, I guess we can talk." Amy leaned forward, her smile encouraging. "Thank you. This means a lot to Nate." But as the conversation continued, Nate's doubts began to grow. The man was evasive, reluctant to share personal details. When Nate offered to take a DNA test to confirm their connection, the man deflected, saying he needed time to think. The morning that night, back at the motel, Nate sat alone with his thoughts. Amy had gone to bed, but her excitement about the day lingered in the air. Nate, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He replayed the conversation with the man named Damian in his head, trying to make sense of it. And then there was Audra's warning, "Amy's not who she says she is." This whole thing could be a setup. Was it possible? Could Amy have orchestrated this entire search, planting the idea of Damian and feeding him false leads, all to manipulate him? For what? Money? Influence? Nate didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were starting to fit. The man in the apartment hadn't seemed surprised or confused, he had seemed prepared. And Amy's insistence on pushing forward, even when things didn't add up, now felt like more than just enthusiasm. The decision the next morning, Nate confronted Amy. "What if this isn't real?" he asked, his voice heavy with doubt. "What if Damian doesn't exist?" Amy's smile faltered for the first time. "Why would you say that? You've seen him. You've spoken to him." "But something doesn't feel right," Nate pressed. "What if this is all a lie?" Amy's face hardened. "You think I'm lying to you? After everything I've done to help you?" Nate didn't respond, his silence more telling than words. For a moment, he thought he saw something flicker in her eyes, guilt, maybe, or fear. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I don't know what's going on in your head, Nate," she said finally. "But if you're not willing to trust me, maybe we should stop this search." It was an ultimatum, and Nate knew it. But it didn't make his choice any easier. If Damian was real, walking away now could mean losing the chance to find his brother. But if this was a trap, staying could cost him everything. In the end, Nate decided to trust his instincts. Whether Damian was real or not, there was only one way to find out, and it started with unraveling the truth about Amy. The truth revealed as the days unfolded, Nate's investigation took a darker turn. Conversations with Denise revealed inconsistencies in Amy's story, and a deeper look into the man claiming to be Damian uncovered a troubling pattern. He had been involved in several scams before, all involving fabricated family connections. Heartbroken but resolute, Nate confronted Amy with the evidence. Her facade crumbled, revealing the truth: Damian had never existed. It had all been a ploy to exploit Nate's longing for family and take his money. For Nate, the revelation was devastating. But it was also liberating. He had been searching for a connection, a way to fill the void in his life. Now, he understood that no amount of lies or manipulation could provide that. As Amy disappeared into the shadows of her own deceit, Nate made a promise to himself: he would find his own path forward. Alone, perhaps, but free. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Devin leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as he studied Denise's expression. The question hung in the air between them, heavier than either of them anticipated. "Is Damian even real?" Devin asked, his voice measured but tinged with suspicion. Denise exhaled slowly, her gaze shifting away. "I don't know," she admitted. "The information I gave Amy and Nate came from a source that's unreliable at best. I wanted to believe it, for their sake. But to know for sure? We'll have to wait until they meet him and run the DNA test." Devin frowned. "You're saying you sent them on a wild goose chase?" "It's not like that," Denise snapped, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "If this Damian exists, and if he truly is Nate's brother, then this could change everything for them. And if he's not, at least they'll know the truth." Devin wasn't convinced. He knew Nate well enough to understand how deeply this search had affected him. Nate wasn't just chasing a lost sibling, he was chasing the hope of belonging, of filling a void he'd carried for years. If this turned out to be a lie, or worse, a scam, it would crush him. Amy's story meanwhile, Nate stood outside the correctional facility in Los Angeles, the weight of anticipation and doubt pressing down on him like a lead blanket. Amy was by his side, clutching a worn photograph of a child she claimed was Damian, her long-lost son. She had told Nate the story countless times, how she had lost Damian when he was just a toddler, taken from her in a custody battle gone horribly wrong. "I don't remember his face now," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. "He was so young when I last saw him. But his name. I've held on to his name. Damian." Nate had wanted to believe her. Her pain seemed genuine, her longing real. But doubt had started to creep in, especially after Audra's warnings. If Amy was telling the truth, then the man they were about to meet, Damian, if that was his name, could be the missing piece in both their lives. But if she wasn't? "Let's get this over with," Nate said finally, his voice tight with resolve. The meeting inside the sterile, fluorescent-lit visitors' room, Nate and Amy sat at a metal table, waiting. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours until finally, a guard escorted a man into the room. Damian. Nate's breath caught in his throat. The man standing before him was younger, in his mid-20s, with sharp features that mirrored Nate's own. The resemblance was uncanny, almost unsettling. The man's eyes, that cold and calculating, locked onto Nate's with an intensity that made his stomach twist. Amy gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's him," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "It has to be." Damian sat down across from them, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak at first, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably before finally saying, "So, you're the ones who wanted to see me. What do you want?" Nate hesitated, his palms damp with sweat. "I'm Nate Hastings. If what we've been told is true, I'm your brother." Damian raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into a faint smirk. "Brother? That's a new one. What makes you think that?" Amy leaned forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm your mother. I lost you when you were just a little boy. I've been looking for you ever since." Damian's gaze flicked to her, his expression unreadable. "I've heard a lot of stories in here, lady. You'll have to do better than that." A lingering doubt after the visit, Nate couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over him. Damian's resemblance to him was undeniable, but something about the man's demeanor felt off. He was guarded, detached, and seemed to lack the curiosity or emotion one might expect from someone reunited with their family. Amy, however, was ecstatic. "It's him, Nate. I know it. He looks just like you. How could it not be him?" Nate nodded reluctantly. "We won't know for sure until we do a DNA test." But even as he said the words, he couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his gut. Something about this didn't feel right. Was Damian really his brother? Or was this another layer of the web Amy had spun around him? The test and the truth. Back at the hotel, Nate called Devon to update him. "We met him," Nate said. "He looks like me, Dev. It's uncanny. But I don't know. Something's off." "Did you ask for a DNA test?" Devon pressed. "Yeah," Nate replied. He agreed to it, but he didn't seem interested. It was like he didn't care either way. "Be careful, Nate," Devon warned. "If this guy's the real deal, great. But if he's not, you need to be ready for that." As the days passed, Nate waited anxiously for the results of the DNA test. Amy was confident, but her enthusiasm only deepened Nate's doubts. If Damian wasn't his brother, what then? And if he was, what kind of person was he? When the results finally arrived, Nate's heart raced as he opened the envelope. The truth lay within those few lines of text, the answer to a question that had consumed him for weeks.